Happy Saturday night, gang. It's the 17th of January. It's 2026, and tonight is really all about SAPA. But let's look at our national debt here real quick before we get into our show. The national debt is $38,621 billion. Yeah. So, once again, there's a lot of congressmen out there that have mamas that need new pairs of shoes. So just pay your taxes and, don't look at the national debt. For those of you who are listening on the radio, $38,621 billion is the national debt as of today's date. One thing I'd like to look at, though, is the price of gold and silver. It's been going up about $10 a week. Let's take a look at last week. Last week it was when we had our show on Saturday night, the price of silver was $79.95. Now it's at $90.09. Let's take a look at gold. Last week, gold was at $4,509 per ounce. Now it's at $4,597 an ounce, up about $90. So the precious metals continue to go up. So this is, once again, this is a supply-demand issue, but also, too, it signals a little bit of weakness in the dollar, I think. And for those who think the dollar is the strongest currency out there, just remember they're all falling at the same time. Everybody's overprinting. This is why silver and gold keep going up. Okay, well, without too much more, I'd like to actually introduce a guest who's been with us many times before, Mr. Ron Calzone with Missouri First. Mr. Ron Calzone is the architect, the original visionary that worked with the 10th Amendment Center for the idea of the Second Amendment Preservation Act, something that Missouri did in a way that no other state was ever able to accomplish. So tonight we're going to talk about the different filings of SAPA, but I'm actually going to put Ron on the spot and bring him on and ask him to give us like a 3-minute summary of what the Second Amendment Preservation Act actually is, which is something that we have not done in this cycle. This is something that was voted into law and signed by the governor in 2021. The Eighth Circuit took away from us, and now we're having to get back again just because of a couple of offensive words in the preamble. So, once again, not the effective parts of the law, just in the preamble of the bill. So, Ron, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Pat.
Hey there. Hey, do you think you could give us a quick synopsis of what SAPA actually is, what it does, what your original vision was?
I think I can remember that.
Okay.
We started at the end of 2012, and so if you want kind of the whole story, prior to that time, somewhere in 2010, the 10th Amendment Center with Michael Bolden and Mike Meharry, they were holding what they called Nullify Now conferences in various parts of the country. And I went to one they had in Kansas City. It was very well attended. You had guys like Tom Woods there. David Rowland was actually there and spoke at it, as a matter of fact. And a lot of us were inspired. Very well attended. At ways. You had guys like Tom Woods there. Well, let's see. Now I'm getting feedback. Pat.
I'm sorry about that. It was my fault, Ron. Go ahead.
Okay, you got it now?
I do.
Okay, so Tom, so anyway, it was very well attended. A lot of us were inspired, and so I got to know the 10th Amendment Center a little bit, and they talked about the old concept of what nullification is, but they also talked about ways that are a little bit maybe more legally sound, considering the courts that we have today. Ways to push back at the abuse of power by the federal government. And one of the things they talked about was applying the anti-commandeering doctrine. Well, the anti-commandeering doctrine is pretty simple. It's a series of U.S. Supreme Court cases that say that the federal government cannot commandeer a state official to do their job. So they can't make the states do things that the states don't want to do by acting as though they were a federal employee. And with respect to gun rights, there was the old Brady Handgun Act, if you remember. James Brady was Ronald Reagan's was a chief of staff. Somebody can chime in and correct me. Who was shot when there was an attempt on President Reagan's life, and his wife pushed through something called the Brady Handgun Act. Well, that gun control law obligated sheriffs to do certain functions until they could get the federal system in line. It was mostly had to do with background checks. So the NICS check that we have now was not in effect at that point in time. And while they were waiting to get the NICS check in effect, they were attempting to force sheriffs to do these background checks. Well, there were a handful of sheriffs, I believe 4 of them, in some of the western states, among them Sheriff Mack and Sheriff Prinz, that said, no, not on our watch. We don't think that this bill is constitutional. We don't want to participate in it. They challenged it, went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we ended up with a landmark opinion that gave even further credibility to this idea of the anti-commandeering doctrine. And so we've seen it used a few times since then. So it was used with respect to Obamacare. It was used again with respect to some of the federal COVID mandates, and which was just a few years ago. And so you have old cases like one called Prigg from many, many decades ago, and then you have the Prinz-Mack case from a handful of decades ago, and then just from a few years ago, you have this case dealing with the COVID debacle. And so we have this very, very solid U.S. Supreme Court precedent saying that a state can decide not to participate in enforcing federal laws. Now, we see the left doing just that with respect to things like immigration. So right now we have states that are resisting ICE as they're trying to perform their functions with respect to immigration. We saw some states do that with respect to enforcing federal marijuana laws. So states would pass maybe a medical marijuana law or maybe a recreational use marijuana law. And of course, they're not going to pass a state law and then enforce federal laws. So they just refused to enforce them. And the court said, yeah, you can do that. You don't have to participate in enforcing these federal laws that you don't like. Now, whether you like those laws or not is immaterial, because I think probably all of us that are listening to this broadcast don't like federal gun control laws. So why not apply the same anti-commandeering doctrine to laws that we don't like? And those, of course, would be like the Gun Control Act of 1968 and 1934 and so on and so forth. So that's what we did with the Missouri Second Amendment Preservation Act. We simply applied the time-tested anti-commandeering doctrine. And as I mentioned, one of the guys that was at the Nullify Now conference in Kansas City was Dave Rowland. Now, Dave Rowland, I'm not sure if then I could have given him this moniker, but today he is, I believe, Missouri's premier constitutional attorney, particularly with respect to those who love liberty. And so we enlisted Dave to write the original Second Amendment Preservation Act. Now, when you ask Dave what time it is, he builds you a grandfather clock. And so what Dave did with the original Second Amendment Preservation Act is he went back and looked at some critical writings in American history. Among those things were the Kentucky and Virginia resolves. Now, I'm going to take a breath and I want to ask if anybody knows what the Kentucky and Virginia resolves were.
I do. I happen to know what they are. I'll bet you Caleb, who can't talk right now, I know he's very familiar with them too.
Yep. So they were written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and they were written in 1798, and they were in response to the Aliens and Seditions Acts. If you're not familiar with the Seditions Acts, we're seeing some of that being invoked right now, sadly, in my opinion. So the point is that they thought that they were wholly unconstitutional, and they wrote these 2 documents, one for Virginia, one for Kentucky, basically saying we're not going to participate in it. And there was a lot of litigation over it, and the interesting outcome of it is that we ended up with Thomas Jefferson being elected president twice, and then James Madison being elected president twice after that. So you had 16 years of Federalist rule, in the White House, that was, I think, significantly affected by these writings that resonated with Americans all over the place from lots of states. And so Dave, being the nerd that he is, borrowed a lot of stuff from Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and he crafted it into this excellent teaching tool that helped us educate the legislature so they understood the principles that we were applying when we said as a state that we are not going to be commandeered by the federal government. And so in 2013, again in 2014, and then, it's kind of a long story why we had to wait until about 2020 to revive the effort. But then again in 2020, 2021, we had the benefit of the writings of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison being read by office holders, by politicians, when they probably would never have come across those writings before. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage everyone, before you go to bed tonight, I'm kidding, look up the Kentucky and Virginia resolves, and then look up the follow-up writing, which was a couple years later, which was about the Principles of 98. So you can probably Google that, the Principles of 98. That's 1798, and you'll get quite an education about how the Federalists thought back at the beginning of our country, and so I was tickled to see this very, very well-written kind of preamble, you could call it, to the Second Amendment Preservation Act, because it preserved for history these principles even further. And, so you can say the Kentucky and Virginia resolves are out there, and that's true, and they probably will get more circulation than our bill does. But here's another way for people to be exposed to those principles. I think that's a good thing. We also thought that having that preamble in there was going to be helpful in getting other states to understand what we were doing with this concept of anti-commandeering, and it would be more likely for other states to adopt the Second Amendment Preservation Act as written in Missouri. So part of that preamble was maybe, it was definitely a little more than the Eighth Circuit could handle. You've got federal judges who think too often that the federal government has all the power, and they don't understand sometimes the full implication of the 10th Amendment. And so it was some words that they misconstrued in that kind of historical education language that they ended up choking on and saying, well, you can't say that. And they admitted in the Eighth Circuit appeals opinion that we can decide as a state that we're not going to enforce federal gun laws. So in essence, what happened as we went through federal court, and we knew we would end up in federal court, and we were really hoping we would end up in the Supreme Court. But what ended up happening is that the Eighth Circuit basically gave us a roadmap of how to court challenge proof the Second Amendment Preservation Act. So that's what we did. We went back to Dave, our premier constitutional attorney, and we said, who by the way, all through the process was involved in litigation. So he was there in the Missouri courts. He was there in the federal courts defending the Second Amendment Preservation Act. So, he's read all the briefs. He's written some of the briefs. He's the most qualified guy to know how best to go forward. And so we asked him to write I don't want to even say a new version, but basically just take out the stuff that got the Eighth Circuit's panties in a bunch, and do that without harming the effective portions of the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And so that's what we ended up with for 2026. Now, I want to back up just a little bit. Maybe have I gone further than you wanted me to, Patrick?
No, actually, I love that you brought in everything that you did, because it did explain the preamble in the original bill, that HB 85.
Okay.
So that was a good thing. Thank you.
So should we talk about what happened last year?
Yes.
Okay. So of course, the finding of the Eighth Circuit was I'm going to say appealed, but actually technically the state of Missouri asked the U.S. Supreme Court for certiorari, or cert. And that was basically their review. It's kind of like an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court, actually what happened was the the Department of Justice drug their heels in filing a reply to Missouri's request for cert. And they asked for an extension. This would have happened about last January, about this time last January 20th or 23rd or so. And they got a 30-day extension, and they got another 30-day extension. They got another 30-day extension. And so we couldn't find out all during the legislative session whether or not the Supreme Court was going to take up our so-called appeal. And of course, our objective has always been to get an appellate court opinion on SAPA, which would embolden more states to follow suit with Missouri. And so I didn't, and I think a lot of us didn't want to see a bill that would, supposedly fix the Eighth Circuit problems until we knew the Supreme Court for sure wasn't going to take it. And that didn't happen until the very end of session. And so I was opposing any attempt to try to fix the Eighth Circuit problem until we knew what the Supreme Court was going to do. And ultimately, my wishes were followed. And I think not just my wishes, but I think that's where you were, Pat, wasn't it? And
yep.
A lot of others. So, but in the meantime, the bill that advanced last year was a bill that wasn't just our original Second Amendment Preservation Act. The original Second Amendment Preservation Act said we're not going to enforce federal gun control laws. We're not going to participate in any way in the enforcement or the implementation or whatever of federal gun control laws. Well, I'm going to call it SAPA fix, and I've got air quotes if you could see me around fix. The SAPA fix bill last year changed that from federal gun control laws to all federal laws relating to firearms at all whatsoever. Now, there are a couple of huge problems with that. The first problem is that it expands SAPA beyond that which the courts looked at last year. And so the roadmap that the Eighth Circuit gave us would no longer apply. So SAPA went from point A to point B. And the Eighth Circuit gave us the roadmap to go from point A to point B without offending them, without them getting their panties in a bunch, because they were wrong. Their opinion was wrong. They shouldn't have done what they did. But now this bill that was filed last year didn't go from point A to point B. It went from point A to point B to point C. And from between point B and point C has not been litigated. So had that passed, we would have ended up with a whole nother round of litigation, with a whole nother set of arguments, and it would be over stuff that was pretty dubious. So that leads me to the second problem with expanding the scope of SAPA, in my opinion, and that is unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. So there's something that used to be called, the name's changed now, it used to be called the Director of Civilian Marksmanship. It's a program started by the Department of Defense. I think it's therefore constitutional, way back in the early 1900s. And there's probably somebody out there that knows the exact dates. I've forgotten them. But the whole idea was to teach Americans how to shoot. And it was part of national defense. Now, 50 years or so ago, when I was in high school, we had a rifle team. And the rifles, the target rifles that we used in our rifle team were supplied by the Director of Civilian Marksmanship. It was a federal program implemented by a federal law, and it would be one that arguably Missouri officials would not be able to participate in if they used the language that was in last year's so-called SAPA fix bill. So I think that's an unintended consequence. Also, in the meantime, last year, going through Congress and still going through Congress, there's something called the National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. That's arguably a good federal law. It's a federal law that's intended to enhance gun rights. It's not a gun control law. And so potentially, if you're going to expand SAPA to say we can't participate in any federal law relating to firearms, we couldn't participate in that either. I think that's an unintended consequence. And then more recently, one of the things that we've kind of considered is that, the federal government, good or bad, the federal government has free ammunition for local law enforcement agencies to practice with. They'll give them practice ammunition. Now, that's another federal law, a federal program that
the DACA grant,
arguably, the DACA grant. Okay, thanks for reminding me of that.
Yep.
That we might not be able to participate in if we're going to say, if we're going to outlaw participation in anything related to federal relating to firearms. So that was another reason that we opposed it. Yet another reason that we opposed it last year is there was nothing in the bill that would prevent the bill from getting amended to do something bad. And, assuming that the things I already mentioned aren't bad, but I mean something like gutting SAPA, taking away its enforceability, or maybe even introducing gun control in it. And trust me, all through 2013 and 2014, I was very hands-on with the bill. Every iteration of the bill in 2013 and 2014, the bill sponsors gave to me and said, "Ron, check it out." And in those years, it became the omnibus gun rights bill, and so there were a lot of moving parts. And I had to filter out a lot of gun control attempts in it, people that tried to sneak gun control into it. And so I've been very wary ever since then. And I've wanted the SAPA bills to be just about SAPA. But more than that, we want to lock the language down. We wanted to lock the language down so they couldn't do anything that was bad with it. If we did that in 2021 when we passed this, the current SAPA, and it was a good thing because when a Democrat tried to put gun control in it, our bill sponsor, Congressman Eric Burleson, was able to raise a point of order and saying, wait a minute, we have a title that prohibits anything that takes away from gun rights. And so the point of order caused the Democrats to have to take their amendment back. So last year's bill didn't have that. And so this is not available on the bill's website. I've forgotten last year's bill number, Patrick. Maybe you remember what it was.
I sure don't, not offhand.
But anyway, if you can go to that bill's webpage, and you won't see this, but the bill sponsor had a Senate substitute for that bill. And that Senate substitute had a provision in it that Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center said created a loophole big enough to drive a freight train through. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit because I think this is kind of important background as we move forward this session. In the Senate, any bill handler at any time can offer a substitute for the bill that has passed the House, that had gone through committee, maybe been amended by committee, and had anything else done to it. At any time, he can withdraw the bill that's on the table and replace it in its entirety, completely. Now, that's not usually what happens. Usually they just make some changes to it. And sometimes, maybe even oftentimes, they're changes that had no vetting whatsoever. And so if I didn't have some senators that were willing to share that Senate substitute with me, none of us would know about it. I was looking for that. Or maybe one, I don't remember now exactly how it happened a year ago, but maybe one of them said, hey, Ron, take a look at this. But the point is that if that bill had gone forward, it would have been filibustered primarily by Democrats, and it might have been 2 a.m. in the morning, when the sponsor would have dropped the Senate substitute, and there maybe would have been, or maybe wouldn't have been, time for another pair of eyes on it, particularly from somebody not in the legislature. And listen, folks, usually there's somebody out there in the public. There's usually a citizen that knows more about any given subject, whether it's this or another subject, than any of the legislators know. So usually there's a subject matter expert not in the legislature and probably not there at 2 a.m. in the morning in the middle of a filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, I was afraid of a bill that didn't have what I call a lockdown title. And sure enough, last session, the bill that didn't have the lockdown title ended up with a really, really, really bad provision in it that really just needed to go to the Senate floor. Well, it would have gone to the Senate floor, and there would have been, if they voted it, it would have gone back to the House, and hopefully the bill sponsor in the House would have caught it and objected, but maybe not. So that's kind of the history, and that's gotten us to where we are now. Now the Supreme Court denied cert,
which means they wouldn't hear it in 2026 specifically, right?
Or 2025. That's right.
Or 2025. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So the hope of getting the Supreme Court to correct the Eighth Circuit is gone. And that means I think the timing is right. It's appropriate for us to try to I hate to even call it fix, but placate, maybe is what we ought to say, placate the Eighth Circuit. And yet we still have to do it right, because there's a lot of people gunning for the Second Amendment Preservation Act, and they're not all Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended, by the way.
Yep. Well, before we get into, and thank you, by the way, for that description.
You can laugh a little bit at my gunning for.
Yeah, that was pretty good, actually.
Okay. We went right over your head. Admit it, Pat.
Yeah. It did not go over my head. In fact, I would have said put a bead on SAPA. But I'm old school too. Okay, and basically, before we get into the four flavors, the four distinct versions of the way to do SAPA, can we do real quick a 2 or 3 minute, what is the Second Amendment Preservation Act? What does it do?
Well, okay, I thought I kind of covered that with the discussion about the anti-commandeering doctrine, but let me tell you what it doesn't do first.
Okay.
The Second Amendment Preservation Act does not pit Missouri law enforcement officials against the DEA or the ATF or whatever. It does not authorize or promote interfering with the federal government enforcing their own laws within the state of Missouri. I would love it if we could do that, but there's no way we could that would survive a court challenge, and we couldn't get public officials to get behind that.
Mm-hmm.
So it says nothing about what the federal government can do, and it does not interfere in any way with them doing their own job enforcing federal gun laws. But what it does,
would it be fair to say that that SAPA does not nullify federal gun laws?
Well, if you talk to the 10th Amendment Center, you'll see that, what you'll find out is that there's more than one way to define nullify. And in the broader sense, in the historic sense, the way it's most often been used in our history, it's more like anti-commandeering. It's non-cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not standing in the way with a tank or a rifle. It's not taking it off the books. So it doesn't do any of those things. But what it does do, well, let's back up just a little bit. For the federal government to do any wholesale gun control, like, let's just say, for instance, we end up with a President Beto O'Rourke.
Mm-hmm.
And Beto O'Rourke is going to come after our scary black rifles. And actually, he'll come after all of our rifles, black or otherwise. But if they were going to say go door to door and confiscate your AR-15, they just don't have the manpower to do it.
Right.
They don't have the resources to do it. They would need local officials to help them do it. And that's kind of and in fact, we're finding that out even as big as Trump has grown ICE. He hired a lot of new ICE agents, apparently many of whom are undertrained. And yet they still need local authorities to get very much done. So to do any wholesale gun control, they're going to need the help of local authorities, and SAPA starves them of that resource by not just saying we don't want to do it, but by making it illegal for them to do it. So my sheriff at the time here in Marys County wrote a letter to the Sheriff's Association when they were opposing SAPA in 2021. My sheriff would not have participated with Beto O'Rourke's door-to-door gun confiscation anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But, the police department in St. Louis City probably would, and pick the rogue sheriff or pick the local law enforcement agency. Most sheriffs probably wouldn't, but there's plenty of police departments that probably would, especially if they were bribed with enough federal money. So SAPA actually makes it against the law for them to do it with penalties if they do. And now, so again, all we're doing with SAPA is we're making it illegal for Missouri officials, not just cops, but Missouri officials, to participate or give any kind of aid to the enforcement of federal gun control laws.
Mm-hmm.
The enforcement mechanism doesn't rely on the government. The enforcement mechanism is a private cause of action.
Mm-hmm.
And the private cause of action allows any individual, and under some circumstances, any individual, even if you weren't personally harmed, to have a cause of action and sue a department. You don't sue the individual official, but you sue the department that they work for. And you can recover $50,000 per occurrence of their violations of SAPA. So we have penalties that are stiff enough that we found after the passage of 2021, a lot of law enforcement agencies changing the way they did business. And then we saw the Department of Justice suing over SAPA because it was being effective when they didn't sue any other states' so-called SAPA light legislation, the stuff they passed that didn't have any teeth in it. So it's proven to be very effective. We've got this roadmap of how to get from point A to point B, not point A to point C, but point A to point B, and it's totally solid constitutionally.
Yep. Okay, so that is, kind of a meat and potato conservative issue, right? The Second Amendment. And the Democrats tend to want more gun control, and in many cases, Democrats just want guns completely taken away from the citizens, leaving only the government with guns. And so, but the issues that we have here in Missouri is there are some Republicans that, I think most Republicans are in Missouri that are currently in the legislature are definitely pro Second Amendment. But it seems like they have different ideas for it, and hence we have 4 flavors, 4 different ways of filing SAPA. Do you think we can go into that, Ron?
We can, but let's give just a very brief background of where we really are with Republicans. So I think virtually every Republican is going to run. They're going to be on this campaign stump saying they support the Second Amendment. They support Article 1, Section 23, which is Missouri's gun rights provision, which, by the way, is stronger than the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment. They'll say they support it. They support our gun rights. But a lot of them are also big law and order folks. And they are understandably concerned about crime, and especially crime in some of the urban centers. And they are pretty ready to give up some liberty in order to secure some safety. Now, I think that one of the founders had something to say about that. Do you remember?
Benjamin Franklin. Those who give up their safety for security deserve neither.
Nope. Try again.
Those who give up their
liberty.
Liberty. That's right. Liberty for security deserve neither. There we go. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah. And so, that unfortunately is an attitude that prevails with some Republicans, so they don't see an immediate threat to our right to bear arms. They figure, well, we've got a Republican president, we've got for a while, and we have a Republican Congress, and so we're not going to see any real gun control come out of Washington, D.C., but we know we have these crime problems.
Yep.
And so we need to make sure that our law enforcement folks have every tool available to them. And, I'm kind of sympathetic to that on one hand, but I'm not willing to give up 1 ounce of liberty for some perceived security.
Yep.
And and particularly in light of the fact that what they seem to think is a good situation now is not going to always be where we're at. In fact, I think there's a very good prospect that Democrats will take over the U.S. House this fall. And, then it's pretty common to see the presidency flip-flop. And, who knows what happens to the Senate. And we may end up in 4 years from now with Democrats having, a slam dunk. They might have the White House and all of Congress. And then Beto O'Rourke's going to get his way. They will be coming after our guns. Well, we want SAPA in place before that happens.
Yep.
And so we've always been taking the long look. It took do the math, from 2013 to 2021. We passed it in 2013, but a Democrat governor vetoed it. So it took from 2013 to 2021 to pass it in the Missouri legislature and get a Republican governor to sign it. So we have to be thinking long term. And you have to be thinking about what the next administration is going to look like, or maybe you have to even think about what this administration could possibly become. And liberty, securing liberty, is always a good idea, no matter who's in power.
Sure. There's a famous line from a novel. It's the best of times and worst of times. And that's what I think is a misnomer for Republicans. If Republicans are in control, we can do a little bit of gun control, and we can keep it under control. We can make sure that we don't really trample on the people's rights. But you never know what's around the corner with the next election, right? And
that's exactly right.
And as soon as the Democrats come in, they'll take advantage of whatever loopholes or whatever little laws that were put in by Republicans and turn it against themselves.
Yeah, and understand, when you have a super majority of Republicans like we have in Missouri, you have a lot of people that really don't care. I'm about to say that I'm not real happy with the Republicans either, but I'm certainly less happy with Democrats. But you've got Democrats that run as Republicans. So we have right now in Jefferson City, there are Republicans that have an R after their name that could just as easily have a D after their name.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if officially you don't see it flip, whether this is the Missouri legislature or Washington, D.C., you still might end up with people that have leftist, statist kind of ideas that would be happy to take away our guns. I mean, for crying out loud, look at the monetary policy.
Sure.
We have so that was intended to be the background for at least the first of the four flavors, as you're calling them. So if we're talking about the bills that have already been filed in Jeff City, or the bills that are being considered to be filed, they kind of fall in one of three categories. Now, these are Republican bills, okay, and these all have to do with SAPA. There are a number of just flat-out gun control bills filed too, primarily by Democrats, that won't see the light of day. But these are the ones that we have to be on the lookout for, and we need, in my opinion, we need to oppose the wrong ones and figure out which ones are right and support them. The first one, I'm going to characterize it this way. And there are two of these, one in the House and one in the Senate right now. I'm not even going to mention the bill sponsors' names, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But as they're drafted right now, both of them just absolutely gut SAPA. They render it totally meaningless. They make it just a placebo. They actually don't do anything. Really, almost literally, all they say is that it's against the law to violate the Second Amendment. Well, it's already against the law to violate the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do like SAPA does and define what those violations look like. And then it says, if somebody hires somebody that violated the Second Amendment, then they're supposed to investigate them. That's all there is to it. No real consequences are required. So those bills possibly are just placeholders. I talked to one of the sponsors of those bills Wednesday. The other sponsor was not available. We're supposed to get together again and talk about what he intends to do with this bill. And he indicated to me that it's a work in progress. Now, we'll have that discussion, and I'll tell them what's wrong with it, and hopefully, some of the rest of you will follow up too. But I'm going to assume that bill is, well, I know it's bad now, but I'm going to assume nothing good can come of that bill. So that's the first concept. There's two bills out there that way. It cuts SAPA, just a placebo. It'll let these politicians go home after session and say, we reenacted SAPA. Mm-hmm. And of course, they won't tell their constituents the dirty details, and that is that it's meaningless. The second flavor is what I call SAPA Plus. This is basically what happened last year in 2025. So this provided all the same protections in the original SAPA, and it also prohibits state involvement in any federal gun law, not just federal gun control. And so we talked earlier about the problems with that. I won't go through that again, but needless to say, it's the kind of thing that can have unintended consequences, and then we end up with all that litigation opportunity again. This bill doesn't have anything protecting it from evolving into anything that could possibly happen. There's no what I call lockdown bill title. So it could be turned into a complete gun confiscation bill. It could be, it could become anything that's bad. So I think that's right. I don't think the title has anything that would well, certainly the bill title doesn't have anything that would keep you from gutting SAPA. We're creating a loophole like the same bill did last year. So that's the second flavor. The third flavor is getting closer to where we want to be. It's the original 2021 SAPA with only the non-functional parts that the Eighth Circuit Court didn't like removed. So the stuff that the Eighth Circuit got their panties in a bunch over, things that really weren't functional in the bill, they're taken out of this version and nothing else is added to it. So that's very good. That's where we want to be. In my opinion, that's where we want to be. SAPA was good. It doesn't need, quote, improvement. We, certainly not until we get it on the books and it's court proof. If you think there are opportunities to expand SAPA, make it stronger, make it better, that's a job for another year. We need to get it on the books, get it around the courts, and then if you pass a bill that goes too far, adding to SAPA, just that portion gets struck out in court.
That's right.
Not the whole thing. That makes sense. Now, what's the problem with the third flavor? The problem with the third flavor is that there's no lockdown language. There's nothing to keep that bill from, I like to say as a Confederate sympathizer, going north. So there's no reason, there's nothing to keep this bill from getting bad, either getting weakened or
a 2 o'clock in the morning amendment.
Right. That makes it weaker or guts it, or maybe even introduces gun control. So needless to say, that's very concerning. And maybe this is a good time to point out why that's concerning. We have very good indication that leadership in the House is going to be very supportive. We don't know about the Senate. I think that the president pro tem of the Senate is going to be okay. I'm very concerned about the majority floor leader in the Senate. And the majority floor leader of the Senate is a little bit more like one of these, always back the blue no matter what, law and order kind of Republicans. I don't want to make it sound like those are bad things necessarily, but, anything taken to an extreme is bad. If you think that, government agencies can do no harm, then I think you need to wake up and smell the coffee. But that's kind of where the majority floor leader of the Senate is, and I think it's going to be hard to get anything good past him. The floor leaders are the gatekeepers of any legislation as it goes to the floor, and they can keep it from going to the floor, and they can limit the amount of time it has on the floor, and they can force people that are proponents of a bill to make some bad choices in the middle of the night, as Pat pointed out. So Here we are, half hour into this, and I forgot that I should actually pick up the phone because it sounds better if I'm doing this. Does that sound better?
Yep, there we go.
So, so that's one of the reasons I think the lockdown language is so important. If we don't have anything in there that can prevent the bill from getting bad, then I'm afraid that particularly in the Senate, there's a very good likelihood that it will go bad. So that leads us to the fourth vision, or the fourth flavor. And that is, it's the original 2021 SAPA with only the non-functional parts that the Eighth Circuit got their pennies in a bunch over removed. No more, no less. So it's just like flavor number 3, except this has a bill title that will prevent any and all amendments to the bill that could possibly weaken or gut SAPA. In fact, it really prevents any substantive amendment to the bill. You might be able to, dot an I if you forgot to dot the I in the original draft, but nothing that makes any substantive change. It's the tightest lockdown title in Missouri history for a bill, and I think I can say that with some authority because I've litigated a lot of these kind of cases, and there's nothing in the court record of any bill that has a title like this that locks it down. Now, there are court opinions, including 2 Calzone v. State cases that went through the Missouri Supreme Court that tell us how to lock down the title. And that's what we're using as the mechanism for locking down this title. So those are the 4 visions. And of course, I don't know, I probably before we take a poll, I think it's probably obvious where I am. I probably shouldn't be saying which one I like, but obviously I like the last one. I like the idea of locking down the title, and it's possible that with fully reincorporating the original SAPA and not allowing it to be weakened, that might doom the bill from the start. It could be that the people that control the flow of legislation won't let that move forward. But if they don't let it move forward, what are our hopes of getting anything good out of at the end of session? Yep. If they won't let it, let me rephrase that. If they won't let it move forward at the beginning of session, then what are the hopes of getting something done good at the end of session?
Yeah. Yep. So, and by the way, I meant, those are the 4 flavors. The fourth flavor is personally what I prefer as well, but I think we should do a poll, basically, as we've got a lot of live listeners right now between a lot of platforms. And basically, if you guys understood the 4 flavors, if you would let us know if you like flavor 1, which is the placebo, feel good, but doesn't do anything bill. 2, basically the SAPA plus version. 3 or 4. 4, of course, basically is the original SAPA that we had in Missouri, minus the language, the non-functional parts of the language that was in the preamble that really upset and actually kind of offended the Eighth Circuit. It wasn't declared unconstitutional, by the way. It was just offensive to them. Some language in the preamble removed. But we have a lockdown title. You can't change the bill. So if you guys let us know which flavor, it's flavor 4. I've got lots of flavor 4s coming in already, Ron.
Well, let me make a case for flavor 3.
Okay.
Okay, I'm opposed to flavor 3, but I want to make the case for it, or just ask this question: if the only thing that we can even hope to move forward with is flavor 3. So it's good SAPA as it's drafted, but no protection from potentially harmful amendments. Should we expend time and treasure promoting it?
Okay.
Or should we insist on, the right language with lockdown title so it can't be tinkered with through the very political legislative process?
I say it needs to be the right language, or it needs to be killed.
It's
got to be absolute.
Flavor 3 is the right language, but there's the potential for it to change. So, I mean, one option is to get behind Flavor 3 and then just fight really hard to keep it from changing. You know, I will warn you this, you better be there
about
at 2
2 o'clock
a.m.
in the morning stuff, Ron? You know, it's
right.
So, you know, that's an issue too. And we've seen that before with other bills too. SB 727 comes to mind. I mean, there was a lot of 3 o'clock in the morning stuff going on with that.
I know.
Yeah, you know, so
I know that we were at when we were in the lieutenant governor's office. Even he was ranting about the 2 o'clock in the morning problems because he oversaw the Senate when they were playing games with the adults that play games on a field. Yeah, that was some ugly dealings.
Yeah, remember the so-called IP reform 2 years ago? It was the middle of the night that the Senate cut a deal, and it was really pretty much just Mary Elizabeth Coleman. She was not letting anybody else know what was going on, and bad stuff happened with that, you know, and that all collapsed that year. And then, of course, last year during a special session, they passed what I think is a terrible so-called IP reform measure. Someday we can talk about that maybe. But yeah, bad stuff happens in the middle of the night. I've been there a number of times when, you know, we kept bad stuff from happening in the middle of the night, but it was very hard to do. And there's times when you couldn't, you know, it just you just got steamrollered.
And
a lot of it depends on whether you got leadership on your side or not.
Yeah, that matters too. And basically, I'm answering Les online. He'd asked basically, what does that lockdown look like? What does that title look like? And so I've got it on the screen right now. So those of you watching live, you should be able to see Senate Bill SB 952 is a good example of that. This is Mike Moon's version of SAPA. And I've highlighted to repeal sections, and I'm not going to read it right now. But basically, that is a locked down title. It's very specific as to what can or cannot be done with this bill. And so I've highlighted that section so you guys can see that. I'll leave it up for another couple of minutes. But also, too, I'll tell you what, I will actually copy that and put a link to this bill actually in all of the chats for all of our socials so you guys can actually see that in real time. I'm sorry for interrupting.
The operative, no, that's great. That's great. But you know, without having to read all the boring numbers, the operative part of that is saying that this bill is relating to the sole, exclusive, and specific purpose of amending the truly agreed to and finally passed, you know, basically the 2021 SAPA, and it says how it's going to amend it. And so anything that they try to do that's not listed in that section, how it's going to be amended, is off the table. So every change to the bill is enumerated in that bill title, and that can't be changed.
Yep. And so if things like this didn't happen at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Flavor 3 is doable. It's possible to get done. But because of the 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning stuff that we've seen here in the last 3-4 years, I think it's safer to lock down the title. You know, shenanigans do happen.
Yeah, you know, and it's possible that it could happen even without the lockdown title, and in spite of the 2 a.m. stuff, you know. But I can tell you, having, you know, worked on this specific issue for so many years, that, you know, if we have to wait until the end of session for something to be finally done, we will work our tail off until the middle of May, and only find out, you know, the last week, maybe the last day. So, you know, for those of you who might maybe remember, in 2014, the Second Amendment Preservation Act died on the Senate floor at 10 minutes until 6, the last day of session. So they have to stop everything at 6 o'clock on Friday, the last day of session. And we fought. It's a long story, but we fought. There had to be a conference between the House and the Senate. There was. Finally got the bill in good shape. The House passed it. A guy named John Deal was the majority floor leader. He's actually been convicted of stuff since then. And he purposely held it up until there was just 20 minutes left in the session. And so the bill was literally run down the hall to the Senate side, went back to the Senate floor with 20 minutes left until everybody turned into a pumpkin at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
And a Democrat just had to stand up and say, well, I've got a book to read.
Yeah.
And obviously anybody can filibuster for 20 minutes. And it killed. So it literally died on the Senate floor at the very last minute of that session. And I'm telling you, we absolutely worked our hearts out all year long to find out that was going to happen. And that was time that could have been spent doing more productive stuff. And, so to me, one of the advantages of the lockdown title is I think we'll find out very early whether it's possible to actually get a pure SAPA passed or not.
Sure.
And if it's just not going to be possible, then we might have to wait until a few people get termed out.
Yep.
And come back next year.
Yep.
So
that's right. We have an election literally this year. That's right.
On that election note, can I ask a quick question?
You bet.
Yeah, on SAPA. So if the bill goes without a lockdown title, and with the Republicans facing popularity issues that they are facing in an election year, do you think that they would try an 11th hour swap out if it would cost them seats in the House or Senate? Because that would make them very unpopular.
So who's going to find out that they passed a placebo SAPA?
Yeah.
Now, we will stand on the tallest hilltops and yell it. And there's a whole lot of, there's a lot of engaged people that will, hear that and they'll question it. But the vast majority of their constituents and, voters that they want to get them to put yard signs in their yard or vote for them, they won't know. That's something these politicians have learned, that, the fact of the matter is that as many as there are of us, and there's lots of us, when I say us, I mean engaged patriots, we're still the minority. And some of them have figured that out, and some of them know that they can make us mad and they can still get away with it if they've got enough money, and they still get to say, we passed SAPA. And that's all some people are going to hear. We passed SAPA, and they're not going to know that it's a placebo SAPA. So the temptation will be very, very real. I think the dynamic of an election year works for us and against us. And it works for us because they're going to be really, really eager to pass SAPA. And it works against us because they're going to be really, really eager to pass SAPA, whatever it is. So, our blessing is also our curse in this case. And that's why I think, especially now, when you have, basically we have a Trump who's a big law and order guy, and then we have a governor that's a big law and order guy. We have a majority floor leader in the Senate that's a big law and order guy, and that's kind of the way people are thinking, and they're not thinking past Trump or Kehoe or I hope we're thinking past the majority floor leader, but that's
so many are just so short-sighted.
Exactly.
And Ron, I thought I'd give you an update here. Everyone wants Flavor 4, but there was a question: is there any way we could do 3 and trust the bill sponsors not to allow an amending of the bill?
Well, the Flavor 3 is not filed yet, and it may not get filed. And the bill sponsor that is considering Flavor 3 is one of the most trusted bill sponsors that I can think of. And so I think there's a very, very good chance that he would not let anything bad happen. But, my question there is that if he's going to be that steadfast and at the 11th hour, when all the pressure's on, then why not be that steadfast at the beginning of the process?
Mm-hmm. Well, also, too, if there's one politician considering flavor 3, it's going to go to another chamber. So if that person's in the Senate or in the House, it's going to go into the other chamber as well. Can the handler for that bill be trusted not to allow an amendment?
No. So if the House bill goes to the Senate, then and if the House bill sponsor is, you can trust him to make sure nothing bad happens.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that something bad won't happen in the Senate.
That's right.
Now, if something changes in the Senate, it's got to go back to the House.
Yep, that's right.
And usually it's that same original bill sponsor that will handle it, but not necessarily. I don't think this would happen, but it's within the realm of possibility that bill could be given to somebody else.
But if it went to the original sponsor and they removed the amendment that was put in your circumstance or in your example in the Senate, and it goes back to the House, they're going to change it again. It has to go back to the Senate again then at that point, doesn't it?
That's right. Then it either goes back to the Senate and they acquiesce, or it just dies.
And then they run out the clock going back and forth,
Yeah. That's basically what happened to us in 2014.
Yep.
You're describing what happened to us in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in reverse, but yeah.
Yep.
So it's there's just really I've not, and maybe there's something I'm missing, but I have just not heard articulated any good reasoning not to lock down the title at the very beginning of the process. If we insist, go ahead.
It needs to be locked down, no matter what. None of these people can really be trusted. That's just a matter of fact. Even the idea of not having a lockdown title makes me kind of want to vomit a little bit.
Well, sometimes you can trust them in the beginning, but there's all kinds of pressures and internal, stuff going on that we don't know about. And
foot dragging because they think they can manipulate.
Yep.
So here's a scenario that I just thought of. So let's say that you've got a House bill sponsor that you can trust implicitly, and there's no way in the world that he's going to let something bad happen. What if he's sick the last week of session?
Yep.
What if he's in the National Guard and he gets deployed? What if he's not there? Then the bill will get assigned to a different House handler.
Yep. Question for you. Les, 9355 is asking, can the other flavors be withdrawn? Can common sense be knocked into the sponsors so they withdraw the disfavored flavors?
They would probably, in order to withdraw them, they would probably have to be afraid of how it looked on their record to file such a bill. So probably what would happen, instead of them withdrawing them, they would probably just not move them.
Yep.
Because, if a bill sponsor doesn't want to have a hearing, they won't have a hearing, and so on and so forth. So whether they withdraw them or not, you can have the same effect. And so I didn't mention the names of the gut SAPA sponsors, the first two
mm-hmm.
bills that are in the first flavor, because I talked to one of them. He seems like a good guy and he wants to talk more. Okay. And so, he basically, he just flat out said that, this is a work in progress. So
mm-hmm.
I really, really believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. You don't just jump on people when, you assume that they mean to do bad. And then the other sponsor of the same, it's exactly the same language in the other chamber. I tried to talk to him earlier this week and he was not available. So he'd already left the building. So,
mm-hmm.
Until they tell me that, it's what they filed or nothing, then I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I don't want anybody else jumping on them yet either.
Yeah.
There'll be time for that later. And
Ron, there's one more thing I'd like to point out. In SAPA, 2021 SAPA, HB 85, 310 that it did go through. that's like the first bill that I know of, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the very first bill I'm aware of that actually went through the legislature that didn't get amended or changed at all. Is that accurate?
What do you mean, ever?
Yeah.
No,
at least in
no,
recent memory.
No, there's probably bills every year that don't get changed. Simple bills.
Okay.
It
didn't become a Christmas tree. It didn't get attached to a Christmas tree. It wasn't amended. It was, basically how it was originally filed. HB 85 isn't that correct? Apart from the fact that 310 was joined to it.
Yeah, I mean they were the same. Yeah, this identical bills. So that's not quite the same. No, there are some bills every year that don't end up becoming Christmas tree bills, and so it's not like. In fact, I would say probably if you did a count, probably more than half of them. But there's a lot of them that do become Christmas tree bills, and if you break down the number of individual laws that are created, most of them are created by the Christmas tree bills. And I haven't counted lately, but that's basically, and that's why we started the organization called the Article 3 Institute. Go to article3institute.org to see what we're doing with that. And that's basically a not-for-profit organization that funds lawsuits to challenge these Christmas tree bills.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, we were able to keep that clean. In 2013 and 2014, we were not able to keep them clean. They were arguably single subject bills, but a whole lot of gun rights stuff got piled onto those bills. And, that was, we ended up with good things those years, ultimately, as part of that whole effort. And part of that effort resulted in our open carry law that we have right now. And, so I got to be the last one that handled and amended the open carry law. And by the way, in 2013, 2014, we were working with folks who started out as their primary purpose, creating a statewide open carry law. And they, we joined efforts and we made a tremendous team. I mean, they were a big part in getting SAPA passed in 2013. And yet their vision was open carry of handguns. And, my little meager contribution to it is I took out the handgun portion of it. So it's open carry of any guns in Missouri. So that was, that maybe made all the work worthwhile. And then in 2014, we actually put our current constitutional gun rights amendment on the ballot. So that was something nobody was paying attention to. And we were fighting SAPA 95% of the time, but that 5% was able to get that very, very good gun rights amendment in our Constitution. So, sometimes there are tangential wins and benefits from other efforts. So.
Yep. So, and that's another thing too. It was really great to see so many great, wonderful patriots across the state of Missouri come together to help get SAPA across the finish line in 2021. I could throw out names. I mean, people I remember seeing at the Capitol regularly during that time. Steve Lampley comes to mind. Of course, Ron, you were there like every day.
Well, and a whole lot of people from home working really hard.
Sure, absolutely. The people that couldn't get to the Capitol with the emails and the phone calls, putting the pressure on. We did Yuba-Tubathons, basically. It's kind of like, back in the old days when Labor Day, you had Jerry's Kids, that program going on, and it was, basically to call in to pledge money, but we were asking people to just make phone calls and send emails. And so we kept the entertainment going for 11 hours straight while it was in the House, 11 hours straight while it was in the Senate, and we also played the live video or audio, respectively, for House and Senate. And so it was really great to see all the active participants. But we're going to call on those people again. We need those people to help us with phone calls, with visits to the Capitol, with emails, anything you guys can do to help with SAPA. And one more thing I'd like to say is, eventually there is going to be a front runner in this horse race. And I think, for the most part, I think everyone's just going to get behind that horse. I think that's probably flavors 1 and 2 are kind of dead horses as far as I'm concerned, but 3 and 4 are possible, winners here. But whatever it is, I mean, this is literally about making sure this doesn't get changed so that the Eighth Circuit doesn't have something else to complain about, something else to strike down our SAPA again for. I mean, there were 8 years of work went into SAPA, and then it turns out the Eighth Circuit strikes it down simply because they're offended by some of the language in the bill. And it's not even the functional parts of the law. We need to avoid a situation like that again. And so
basically what they struck down was because the Missouri legislature expressed their opinion about federal gun control.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what they got their panties in a bunch over.
Sure.
And it was just absolutely ridiculous.
Yep.
So if you go to Dave Rowland's the Freedom Center, the Freedom Center of Missouri, or is it the Missouri Freedom Center? But it's mofreedom.org. mofreedom.org, and do a search for SAPA or the Second Amendment Preservation Act and see what, the constitutional attorney that knows most about the legal nuts and bolts of this, see what he wrote about the Eighth Circuit's opinion. It was just beyond the pale.
Yep. And of course, he's the author. Basically, he wrote the words on the page. And
so nobody knows it better than him.
That's right. So at any rate, that's, I think, and by the way, I mean, it's a strong 4, Ron, across the board here, with one question, and I already asked what it was. If it's possible to do 3 and trust the bill sponsors not to muck it up, so.
Well, probably my most valuable takeaway from this discussion this evening. I've been doing most of the talking. Sorry, guys.
Oh, you're good.
But, it's the thought that even if we've got a House sponsor that we can trust to pull the plug if something bad happens. And by the way, that's what I had to do in 2014. We would have passed SAPA again in 2014. We would have still been faced with a Democrat governor. That would have been a problem.
Yeah.
But I pulled the plug on it because it had a piece of gun control in it. It had red flag in it.
Yep.
And I say again?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I actually pulled the plug, maybe a day or two before the end of session, and it literally took me until 11:30, the night before the last day of session, when the conference committee report was due at midnight, to convince both of the bill sponsors, the House and the Senate bill sponsor, that what they put in there was actually red flag gun control. Yeah. They didn't think it was. And I finally figured out how to just demonstrate to them that it was. And at literally 11:30 at night, they acquiesced and said, okay, we've got to take that out. They took it out, and then we had to run around Jeff City finding the members of the conference committee to get them to sign the conference committee report. That's all in the weeds, I know, for you all, but anyway, the thing that I really learned is that even if we can rely on our House sponsor to pull the plug, and if something bad happens in the Senate, what if he's not there?
Yep.
What if he's sick? What if he's in Panama on guard duty? Whatever else might happen. What if his wife was in an accident? Who knows what could happen, and he's not there. And why not have the lockdown language? There's just no reason not to have the lockdown language.
Yep. And I think it's fair if you're calling up your senator, your representative, and you're saying, and by the way, they'll have no idea if you say flavor 4. What you need to say is, we need the same language we had in 2021, and we need a lockdown title. So that's what flavor 4 represents, by the way. That means we get the same exact law that we had in 2021. Because remember now, what offended the Eighth Circuit had nothing to do with the functional parts of the law. It was part of the preamble that offended them, which is not an actionable part of the law. So when you call your senator and representative, by the way, in all of our socials, if you look in the description section, I have conveniently placed for you the roster for the Missouri House and the roster for the Missouri Senate. Both of these, websites have tools. If you don't know who your rep or your senator is, there's tools on both websites to find out who they are by putting in your address. But when you call them up, just, say, let's have a lockdown title. And there's nothing wrong with asking them if they have an aversion to a lockdown title. And if they say they do have an aversion to a lockdown title, please ask them what it is and come back and let us know. You can email me direct. Most of you, a lot of you do have my email address. Or just comment in these videos down below in the comments section after the fact and say, yeah, I talked to Senator so-and-so or Representative so-and-so. They don't like the lockdown title because, just tell us what they say. Please do. Go ahead.
You know what they're going to say, and this would ordinarily be, I think, a justifiable reason to oppose a total lockdown title like this. They're going to say, we're a deliberative body. We all need to debate it, and we need to see, we need to work together to come up with the best product we can. Well, that might be true, except for the fact that we did that
8 years of it
from 2013. That's right. 8 years. We did that for 8 years. In 2021, every Republican, let me put it this way. No, not a single Republican voted no. Now in the Senate, there was a Republican that was absent.
Justin Brown.
And in the House, there were several Republicans that were absent, maybe for good, maybe for bad reasons. I don't know. But none of them voted no. So basically, it was a unanimous vote by Republicans that voted to support this very language. The governor signed it. The lieutenant governor at the time, who's now our governor, was there at the bill signing, making sure he got in the photo ops and saying how much he loved all this. We have a U.S. senator that was in the Senate at the time, and he ran for the AG, and then he ran for U.S. Senate on his Second Amendment Preservation Act record. Of course, Eric Burleson did, who's now in the U.S. House. So this is just the language that they've all already approved.
And to make matters actually more interesting, it's important to remind your senator and your representative, if they do say that the Eighth Circuit never, ever, ever said, and they had plenty of opportunity to say it, they never said it was an unconstitutional bill. They didn't say that, did they, Ron? In fact,
well, they said, to be accurate, they said that the bill was unconstitutional, but they also explicitly said that the functional part of the bill is all stuff that we have the right to do as a state. Yep. They said it was unconstitutional by virtue of the part that the non-functional part that they didn't like.
Yeah, the function. I'm sorry, excuse me. I meant the functional part of the bill they didn't say was unconstitutional.
Right.
So
right.
I meant that's what I meant by that. So so once again, they were offended, folks. The Eighth Circuit was offended by some of the language in the preamble is all. And so, and Ron is so nicely saying they got their panties in a wad or panties in a bunch. But the fact is, it was never declared an unconstitutional law, except by Democrats. Democrats are the only ones who actually said that. And I do remember several Democrats saying that while it was being debated, too. However, they couldn't articulate why it was unconstitutional. They simply declared it was unconstitutional. And we're talking about during debate and perfection. And by the way, gang, if you guys want to go hear those, please do seek out. And last week, I did show you on the old Truth, Money, and Freedom podcast, all of our old SAPA videos, where we were running SAPA in 2020 and 2021, including the Ubatubathons. And that's where the Ubatubathon in the Senate, if memory serves, no, it was also in the House. Pete Meredith did declare that SAPA was unconstitutional, if you remember that, Ron. But in the Senate, we had a couple of, let's just say, energized Democrat senators saying SAPA was unconstitutional. But the courts didn't say that about the functional part of the law. So
no, in fact, they explicitly said that we can refuse to cooperate.
Yep. So, okay. And guys, I think we're getting closer to the end of this. So those of you who have any questions about SAPA or, anything for Ron Calzone about the procedural process, that we're about to go through again, Basically. And also, too, that's another thing, too, is to remember there is absolutely no guarantee that we're going to finish up and get SAPA done in 2026. However, there is a very good chance we can. So, but there's no guarantee. So always keep that in mind.
There is in the.
Go ahead.
And what we do this year, even if we don't get it done, will be very important groundwork for next year.
Yep.
Again, we have some people in some powerful positions that we might have to wait for them to turn out. And again, that's another one of my reasons for wanting the lockdown title. With it, we will find out sooner rather than after spending 4 months with lots of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yep.
And I want to say this too, and then I probably really need to go. It's getting past my bedtime.
Yeah.
So, but this is one of the things I want to point out. If I can remember what it is, since I'm getting close to my bedtime and I'm not thinking straight. When you have a bill that's as important as, say, gold and silver or SAPA, consciously or subconsciously, you don't want to make enemies that might make it hard to get those important bills done, go across the finish line. And so, I seldom am affected by politics or the thing I'm about to describe to you now, but I have to admit that there's probably times when I don't say something about a stupid bill out there because I think I need the person that it's going to offend to support whatever it is I'm working on that's really important, like SAPA. So right now, for instance, I think that the income tax elimination amendment, so-called elimination amendment that just got filed Wednesday or Tuesday, I guess, after the governor's State of the State speech, is awful. It's awful. And I'm sure you guys will be talking about it.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not sure, and I know that I could write an op-ed on it that would get pretty widely circulated. I think I could probably get in a couple of, one or two of the major papers and maybe the Missouri Times, but I don't know that I want to make the Speaker of the House, who's the sponsor of that HJR, I don't know that I want to risk making him mad. I've got a very good relationship with him now, and I don't know if that'll make him mad. I'm already, challenging 3 of their bills that they passed the last 2 years in court. And, so I would rather find out earlier in the session that there's no path forward. So that way I can be a big mouth about the bad bills out there.
Yep.
Does that make any sense?
It does. It absolutely does. But also, too, to your point, as we make phone calls and we send emails and we visit the Capitol, sometimes en masse, it's also a really good idea to understand you don't want to make enemies up there when you're trying to get good things done. It's okay to have disagreements, but it's not a good idea to argue or point fingers and be aggressive in your behavior. Those of you who have followed us around for Knock and Shock should know we don't do that. The Missouri Freedom Initiative does not do that. We can have disagreements with legislators, and we have in the past, but it's very friendly disagreements. It's a very friendly debate.
Respectful.
It's very respectful.
The operative word.
Yep, that's right. And
if you're respectful and you go there with information and an informed opinion, then most of the time they will respect you for it.
Sure.
And if you respect their time too, don't just go in there like a bull in China shop.
Yep. Absolutely. In fact, that's another good thing to do. Whenever you meet with a representative or a senator, always thank them for their time. And hopefully they thank you right back for your time because you made an effort to get up to the Capitol. They recognize that. They know that you're driving usually from far away, to visit with those folks up there. I have a quick question here that came from M. Gabriel. He's been with us since SAPA, in 2020, 2021. He asked if the severability clause is already built in to respective SAPA bills. I told him I believe it's already in there. I think it's in Mike Moon's anyway.
I have to admit that I've been so busy fighting these other aspects of it that I have not paid attention to an explicit severability clause. But every bill filed in the state of Missouri is severable unless there's a non-severability clause in it.
Okay.
So
It's in there.
there's a statute.
Yeah.
You know, is it in there? Are you looking at it?
Yeah, I saw it in Mike Moon's, but I have to admit I didn't look very carefully.
Yeah, it's in both.
Okay, gotcha. So so you're saying now that Bryant's also has it. Is that correct,
Yeah,
Caleb?
it's identical.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay.
So okay, that answers your question then, M. Gabriel. Yes, we have a severability clause. We've identified 2 bills so far. We didn't want to name names or anything because there may be more versions of Flavor 4. And there may be a Flavor 3 coming out and such, but so we didn't want to give names. But the idea, the concept is basically for people to call their representatives and their senators, say, give us the SAPA, please give us the SAPA we got in 2021, and let's go ahead and lock down the title so it can't be changed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning like we've seen quite a bit here in the last few years in the legislature. And
I think probably by Monday or Tuesday, we're going to be at a point where we need to say, get behind this bill or that bill,
yeah,
and start getting co-sponsors.
okay,
So that's and of course the thing is that it's not usually a good idea. Let's say that there's 3 good bills out there, they're all equally good, the sponsors are equally good, and so you don't want to go say go co-sponsor this one, and this one.
Yep.
Because then you split up your co-sponsors.
That's right.
There needs to be one bill in the House and one bill in the Senate for people to rally around.
That's right. And so and by the way, Ron, thank you for mentioning that. I've had several people contact me, particularly in the last week, saying, what bill, are we looking at in the House? And I said, well, let's hold off on that just a bit because, we had some late filings. We had one come out from Bryant Wolfen this week, in fact, Thursday morning, I believe. And then we've heard there's a real good chance there's one more coming out in the House. So, and it's, from someone we've worked with in the past. We want to see all of them and make sure that we make the right choice and we pick the right horse in the House as well. In the Senate, I think it's very safe to say that Mike Moon's bill satisfies the requirements of Flavor 4. Not only does it give us the original SAPA, but it also has a lockdown title. So I meant
I don't think there's. You tell me what you think, Pat, but I don't think there's any reason not to encourage senators to co-sponsor Mike Moon's bill.
Yeah, no. We've been doing it. Unfortunately, we've been unsuccessful so far, as you know. We've been asking for co-sponsors on Mike Moon's bill.
Senators they don't very often co-sponsor stuff, so it's a challenge. Kind of a tough pull.
Yeah, it's a challenge in the Senate. Not so much in the House. In the Senate, it's a real challenge. We did get a couple of co-sponsors on silver and gold, which was very surprising. So not so much from the first co-sponsor, but the second co-sponsor kind of shocked me. The third co-sponsor kind of shocked me too, actually. There was 3 co-sponsors on silver and gold in the Senate. So, guys, I'll tell you what. Because of that, I may do a midweek email to let you know where we're at in the House on the flavors. And if you guys are agreeable to that, I'll go ahead and send something out so we can get started on the co-sponsorship drive in the House, which is actually really important. We're getting started late on that this year, and it's not because we're lazy or anything else like that. It's just House, research or House underwriting, whatever you want to call it, has been running a little bit slow. And so,
that was a big problem in both the House and the Senate, getting them to draft the bill the way we wanted, the way the sponsors wanted to draft, and it just there was lots and lots of back and forth. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens that most people never know about. It takes a lot of work. But listen, that said, I've got to get to bed. I'm really beat.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let me wrap it up real quick then. Ron, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight and help us understand.
Thank you for the forum.
You bet. Guys, this is important. For those of you who were with us for the original SAPA, this is really critical that we get it right this time because, once again, if we get it wrong, we'll get challenged again. And we'll have to go through this whole thing a third time. So let's get it right, and basically that's exactly why we're having these discussions. And Ron, your input is critical. Thank you so much for this. And if Dave Rowland ever listens in on some of these, a big shout out to Dave Rowland. You know, the guy who actually put pen to paper and actually wrote SAPA, worked with Ron on that, and all the other people that have helped make SAPA happen in the state of Missouri. And yes, we're starting up the engine. We're getting the band back together to get it done again. We're gonna try real hard to get it done this year. Ron, thank you again.
It was a. I've got to say this before we sign up, but SAPA 2021, 2014, 2013, they were all huge collaborative efforts. So don't let anybody tell you that me or Pat or anybody else were the big movers. It was a cooperative effort.
It sure was.
And if you care about sharing credit, I kind of don't, but if you do, there's lots of credit to spread around.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. In fact, I threw out Lampley because he was always up there in the Capitol in 2021, working SAPA. And so yet another guy, and he's Missouri Republican Association or something like that. So there were a lot of organizations that came together. There's lots of gun groups in Missouri that cared a great deal about SAPA, and we're reaching out to them as well. Okay. All right, gang, we're going to wrap it up for now, but I'll tell you what, will probably be a midweek email coming from me when we know about what's going on in the House. So, and that'll be the, basically, I would say probably the centerpiece of our next live stream. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to thank everyone who came on the forum tonight. I know we didn't get a lot of talking, and we needed Ron to be able to get a lot of information out for us. So thank you for all of you for joining us on our platforms as well. You could have done anything on your Saturday night. You chose to learn about SAPA with us. Thank you so much for that. God bless all of you. You all have a pleasant evening, and we'll see you soon. Take care, gang.